Hi, my name's Lunith. My family planned my sister's wedding without telling me. No invite, no explanation, just silence. They said I was too sensitive, too distant, not aligned with the family brand. But when Grandpa died and left me the majority of his inheritance, suddenly, every one of them showed up. Not to apologize, not to make things right. They came to take. So I handed them a folder, and when they opened it, their smiles disappeared. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased from your own bloodline, then asked to smile and stay quiet? Yeah, me too. They didn't forget me. They made sure I wasn't there. I hadn't spoken those words out loud, yet, but they echoed in my mind with the same sting as if I had screamed them. It was early evening in Eugene, a warm June sun still brushing the edges of the trees in my backyard. I sat cross-legged on the porch steps, staring into the garden I'd spent the morning tending. A pair of hummingbirds darted between the hanging feeders like nothing had changed, but everything had. The wedding happened that afternoon. My sister, Callista, in white lace and pearls, hand in hand with Draven. They'd said "I do" beneath a flower-draped arch, surrounded by rows of perfectly dressed guests, champagne flutes raised, smiles wide. I saw it all, through someone else's phone. It was a story on Instagram, posted by a girl I barely remembered from high school, who now apparently worked in Callista's PR firm. The tag said it all: Callista and Draven forever. I stared at the post like it might blink away if I waited long enough. It didn't. Tap after tap, I scrolled through the clips, bridesmaids laughing, Vera, our mother, crying with pride, Dad, looking stiff but proud, Ison, my older brother, giving a toast. One frame even caught a printed seating chart on an easel. My name wasn't there. I blinked hard. Maybe. No. I zoomed in. Read it twice. Names I knew, faces I didn't, but not mine. They didn't tell me. They didn't even pretend. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. Some absurd miscommunication. Maybe an Evite got caught in spam. Maybe they thought I wouldn't come. Living here in Eugene, while they all hovered in the orbit of San Francisco's polished glow. But I wasn't delusional. I knew this family too well. They didn't forget. They decided. I stood up, numb legs stretching under me, and walked back inside the cottage, Grandpa Ambrose's old place, still filled with the smell of lavender and cedar. The floor creaked beneath my bare feet. I picked up my phone from the side table and dialed Mom's number. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I hung up and tried Ison. "Hey," I said as soon as he answered. "Did Callista get married today?" Silence. He let out a breath that sounded far too familiar, the kind that says, "We knew this would come up." "It was a small thing," he replied flatly. "Just a backyard thing. Quick, nothing fancy." "I saw the clips, Ison," I said. "I saw the chairs, the speeches, the champagne tower. There were 24 people at least." Pause. "They wanted to keep it simple. You live far. You're not always around." My jaw clenched. "I'm not around because I'm never asked to be." He didn't respond. I opened the old family group chat we'd used for holidays. No new messages in weeks, no mention of the wedding. Then I saw it. In my contacts, near the top. Group. Family core. I wasn't in it. I opened Callista's contact and typed, "Congratulations. I didn't know today was your big day." The status turned to read, and nothing came. No reply. Not even a thumbs up. Hours passed. The sun dropped below the pine trees, and a slow chill settled over the house. I wandered the hallway, fingertips trailing along the wall as I passed framed photos of people who no longer saw me. Weddings, birthdays, graduations, always polished, always posed. I climbed the attic stairs, each creaking like a question. I hadn't been up here in months. Dust lined the edges of old trunks, boxes of holiday lights, and forgotten furniture. Against the back wall sat Grandpa's cedar chest, the one he told me never to throw away. I opened it. Inside were bundles of old letters, newspaper clippings, a cigar box full of Polaroids. On top lay a yellow post-it with my name scribbled in his shaky handwriting. Lunith, keep these. I picked up a frame. It was Callista, senior year, cap and gown. In the background, barely visible, a blur of me, clapping from the last row. I remembered that day. I'd skipped my final internship interview to hem her dress the night before. She'd cried over a crooked zipper, and I'd spent 4 hours hand-sewing lace so she could feel perfect. Mom never mentioned it. Callista never thanked me. Back then, I told myself family doesn't keep score. But now, I saw it differently. They'd never seen me. Not really. I carried the frame downstairs and set it on the kitchen table. The clock read 9:18 p.m. Outside, frogs chirped near the creek. I poured a glass of water, then sat, the silence pressing in like fog. This isn't forgetting, I whispered to no one. This is erasure. I stared at the photo, my own faded outline barely present. They didn't forget me. They made sure I wasn't there. The moment I stepped away from the photo on the kitchen table, something inside me started shifting. It wasn't rage, at least not the kind that explodes. It was quieter, denser, like a heavy stone dropped into still water. The ripples were slow but deliberate. The next morning, I went about my routine on autopilot. Coffee, emails, feed the neighbor's cat. Margot was on vacation. When I returned home, I saw the small cardboard shipping box still sitting on the entryway bench. The one I'd mailed to Callista a week before the wedding. I had wrapped the necklace in velvet, handwritten a note on our grandmother Ione's old stationery. May this bring you the kind of love that lasts, I wrote. It was sentimental, sure. But that necklace had history. Grandma wore it on her own wedding day. I thought, maybe this was my way of saying, you matter to me, even if I don't matter to you. There was no thank you message, no emoji, no acknowledgement. I checked the tracking again. It had been signed for, by someone named T. Jenkins, probably a planner or intern. That night, I curled up on the couch with my laptop, just trying to distract myself with a show. But habit made me check social media. I searched the wedding hashtag again, even though I already knew what I'd find. One video stood out, a shaky clip from a guest's phone sweeping across the reception's gift table. Gold ribbons, shiny packages, everything lined up perfectly. Except for one box. Mine? It sat slightly off to the side. Untouched, a bit crushed at the corner. In a later story, I saw it again. This time in the background, right beside the venue's trash bin. So that's what it was worth. I paused the video, zoomed in. My handwriting, my label. No mistake, I couldn't cry. Not then, I just sat. Frozen. The hurt wasn't loud. It pulsed, slow and steady, like a heartbeat in the chest of someone trying too hard to stay composed. And then came the final blow. A clip of Callista's wedding speech popped up in her agency's feed. To my beautiful family, she said, standing under strings of lights and floral arches. Thank you for always lifting me up, for reminding me I deserve happiness. The camera panned as she mentioned each name. Mom! Vera! You've been my anchor. Dad, you always taught me to reach higher. Ison, my voice of reason. Pebble, yes, even you, my sweet little dog in heaven, you were there through every heartbreak. Everyone, except me. I wasn't shocked exactly, but it still stole my breath. In the clip, I saw Mom beaming, dabbing at her eyes. Ison laughed at some inside joke. Draven raised his glass. I closed the laptop slowly. My dinner sat untouched. The microwave had beeped an hour ago, long forgotten. I sat there for a long time, the weight of it all pressing against my chest like something too large to name. Eventually, I texted Ison. So, I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. He replied a few minutes later. She didn't mean anything by it. It was a chaotic week. Right. Then a text from Mom. Please don't ruin her moment. Families drift sometimes. Families drift was rich, coming from a woman who once shamed me for missing Thanksgiving due to food poisoning. It wasn't about drifting. It was about design. They didn't want me to exist in that narrative. I didn't fit the brand. A few hours later, a message pinged from a number I hadn't seen in years. Calder. Heard about the wedding. I'm sorry. Truly. I stared at his name. Calder was one of the few people in my life who didn't make me feel like an afterthought. Back in high school, we were the kind of friends who could sit in silence and still feel understood. I hadn't seen him since Grandpa's funeral. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know what to say. That night, I reheated the dinner, forced myself to eat half, then washed the plate and sat at the table again, lights off, with only the hum of the fridge and the clock ticking above the stove. I gripped my fork, staring at nothing. It bent slightly between my fingers. I set it down, opened my laptop, clicked compose. Subject: to my family. I stared at the blinking cursor. What could I say that they hadn't already chosen to ignore? I closed the tab, opened my notes app instead, typed one line. The next time they see me, I'll be the one giving the speech. And I meant it. She wasn't wrong. I was surrounded by the blind. By Saturday morning, the weight of everything still sat heavy on my chest. The wedding clips, the silence, the speeches where my name didn't even warrant a passing mention. All of it lingered like smoke that refused to clear. I had taken the weekend off from work, under the vague excuse of needing personal time. I didn't say what for. Honestly, I didn't need to. After pouring myself a second cup of coffee and barely touching it, I put on my boots and drove out toward the Springfield Pioneer Cemetery. I hadn't been there since Ambrose's funeral 2 years ago, and the thought of going alone felt strange. But that's the thing about grief. It doesn't care if you have company or not. The gravel under my tires crackled as I pulled into the narrow drive, passing rows of weathered headstones and wildflowers swaying in the wind. The sky was low, gray, like it had been watching me from a distance all week, and finally decided to come closer. I parked near the back of the cemetery and walked with a bouquet of lilies in my arms, the soles of my boots sinking slightly into damp earth. It had rained the night before, and the air still smelled of wet pine and soil. Ambrose's grave sat at the edge of the tree line, quiet, modest, just like him. A flat stone with his name, dates, and a small engraving of a mountain range. No fresh flowers. No signs that anyone else had been here lately. I knelt and brushed some pine needles off the stone. "Hey, Grandpa," I said softly, placing the bouquet down. "You missed one hell of a party. Or maybe I should say, they missed you." A light breeze passed through the trees behind me, rustling the leaves like a sigh. "I wasn't invited, by the way. Again." I sat on the edge of the grass, pulling my coat tighter. It's not that I wanted some big role. I didn't expect to be center stage. But being left out like that? Not even a seat? I felt the lump rise in my throat, but I pushed it down. "They made sure I wasn't there," I whispered. I stayed for nearly an hour, just sitting, talking sometimes, mostly listening, to nothing and everything at once. And when I finally stood to leave, I noticed a little brass corner peeking out beneath the overgrowth near the edge of a tree trunk. I pulled at it gently and unearthed a small rusted tin box. At first, I thought it might have been some leftover from someone else's family. But when I opened the lid, inside was an envelope, sealed in wax and labeled in my grandmother's handwriting. "To Luneth, when they forget your name." I froze. Grandma Ione had passed before I turned 20, but her memory lived in flashes. Her worn cardigans, the smell of orange peels on her fingers, the way she hummed when she stirred tea. She was the only one who ever defended me when Vera snapped too harshly. The only one who said, "You don't have to be loud to matter." I slid the envelope into my coat pocket, heart pounding. Back at home, I sat at the kitchen table and opened it. Her handwriting, loopy and firm, filled the page. "You were not invisible, child. You were just surrounded by the blind. They will make you feel like a ghost, quiet enough to forget. But I see you, and someday someone else will too. Until then, remember, your worth was never up for a vote." I didn't realize I was crying until the words blurred in front of me. I read the letter twice, then again, aloud, to myself. The sound of her voice in my head, steady, certain, was more grounding than anything I'd felt all week. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the cedar chest upstairs, next to the photo of Callista in her graduation gown and my half-visible smile in the background. Then I pulled out my journal. Underneath yesterday's line, "The next time they see me, I'll be the one giving the speech," I added a second, "and I won't need a microphone to be heard." That afternoon, I made tea and sat in the living room, flipping through an old photo album. Every other page held a piece of me they always pretended didn't exist. School plays where I helped backstage, birthdays where I took the pictures instead of being in them. And then, a memory came rushing back. Grandpa and I cleaning up after one of Mom's Christmas dinners. He washed dishes, I dried. Everyone else had gone off to watch a movie. He handed me a plate and said, "You've got a calm kind of strength, Luneth. The others will need that someday, but even if they don't, you'll still have it." He didn't say much, my grandfather, but when he did, it meant something. I closed the album and grabbed my phone. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the floor. My fingers hovered over Calder's name. I hadn't replied to his text yet. I tapped out a message. "I think I'm ready to talk about what Grandpa left behind." His reply came almost instantly. "Still have the envelope he signed. We should meet." I lit a candle and set it beside the picture of Ambrose and Ione on the mantel. The flame flickered, casting gold light across the room. I stared at it for a long time. My face didn't look broken anymore, just settled, clear. They will come for it, and I won't run. The next morning was unusually still. Even the birds outside my window seemed quieter, like they too were bracing for something. I didn't rush through breakfast. I sat with my toast and eggs longer than usual, letting the warmth of the coffee cup settle into my palms, while my mind worked through what I had to do next. By 10:45 a.m., I was in downtown Eugene, standing outside Calder's law office. It was tucked between an old bakery and a frame shop, its painted wood sign slightly faded by the years. But the gold letters still read clearly, Calder R. Hayes, Estate Law. He had always liked the old-school feel, even when we were teenagers, said it felt honest. He greeted me with a quiet nod and a mug of chamomile tea already waiting on his desk. "You look like someone who already knows what's in the envelope," he said gently. I sat down. "I don't, but I have a feeling it's something that's going to make them squirm." He smiled faintly. "You wouldn't be wrong." Calder reached into his bottom drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, still stamped with Ambrose's wax insignia, a carving of the mountain that loomed behind our family's lumber mill. He broke the seal and carefully unfolded 2 documents. The first was short. A handwritten letter in Ambrose's blocky penmanship. "Luneth understands legacy. She doesn't need to shout to deserve it. That's why I trust her with what I built." The second was the legal amendment to his will, signed, witnessed, and notarized, clearly transferring 60% of Ambrose Timber's stock to me. Not to Vera, not to Callista, not to Eisen, to me. I sat there for a moment, blinking as I reread the same line 3 times. I wasn't shocked. Ambrose had hinted at things like this before, but seeing it in ink made it real. "Why didn't he tell anyone?" I asked quietly. "He didn't want to be fought over while he was still breathing," Calder said, "and he trusted you to know what to do when the time came." I ran my fingers along the edge of the paper. "They're going to lose their minds." "They're going to try to make it look like you stole it," Calder replied matter-of-factly. "They'll say you manipulated him, that it's forged. They'll throw everything at the wall and see what sticks." I met his eyes. "And how do we stop that?" He tapped a small USB drive on the table. "Ambrose recorded a video. It's time-stamped, clear audio and video. He names you directly, explains everything. I made multiple copies, and one's already uploaded to a secure server." I exhaled slowly. "He really thought of everything," Calder nodded. "He knew who he was dealing with." Later that afternoon, I sat in my driveway, letting the car engine tick softly as it cooled. I hadn't gone inside yet. I just stared out the windshield at the gravel path that led behind the cottage to the old equipment shed. I remembered following Ambrose down that path as a child, watching him work on machines while he whistled through his teeth. Back then, I thought the world was simple. That being good was enough to be seen, to be heard. But life had other ideas. Inside, I set the legal documents on the dining table and made myself a sandwich. Halfway through chewing, I stopped, set the plate aside, and walked into the hallway. The cedar chest sat in the corner, quiet as always. I opened it again and placed Ambrose's letter next to Ione's. Two voices I could still hear when the rest of the world tried to drown me out. Then I went to my desk, printed 2 copies of the amendment, and folded them neatly. One went into my fireproof box. The other into a wooden case I locked and tucked inside the closet. They would come for it. Of course they would. But now I was ready. When the sun dipped low, I stepped outside with a cup of tea. The sky was a soft gradient, peach into indigo, and the pine trees stood like sentries around the cottage. My phone buzzed. A new message from Calder. "You have time to decide when to act, but I'd bet they reach out by end of week," I typed back. "They already are, just not with words." The silence from their end wasn't peace, it was planning. I watched a crow settle on the edge of the roof, tilting its head at me. I raised my glass in mock salute. "They think this is about money," I said under my breath. "They have no idea what they're really about to lose." They blinked first. I'd barely stepped back into the house when a knock came at the door. Not sharp, just calculated. I opened it to find a courier in a branded vest holding an envelope with my name in all caps, neatly typed, too formal for anything casual. Inside was an invitation, or at least that's what they called it. "Family discussion," it read, "to realign expectations and move forward as one." The words dripped with fake warmth. At the bottom, Vera's signature. Not a text, not a call, a letter. Like we were negotiating a business merger, not a family fracture. The meeting was scheduled for 4 p.m. the next day. Their house, not neutral ground. I closed the envelope and tossed it onto the table like it burned. I texted Calder. "They want a meeting." His reply came a moment later. "They're not ready for the documents. You don't need to go." I stared at the message for a while, then typed back, "I do." The following afternoon, I drove the familiar route to Vera and Meryl's house. The hedges were trimmed, flowers blooming, just like every summer. But something about the house felt colder now, like the siding itself had learned how to pretend. Vera greeted me at the door, her lips stretching into a diplomatic smile. "Lunith," she said with artificial brightness. "I'm glad you came. We just want to talk like adults." "Sure," I replied, stepping inside. The air smelled like potpourri and passive aggression. Everyone was already seated around the long dining room table. Callista, in a silk blouse, her hair perfectly styled. Eason, tapping his fingers lightly on his mug. Draven sat with his arm draped over the back of Callista's chair, acting like he owned the furniture. Meryl, quiet as always, glanced at me, but said nothing. "Please sit," Callista said, gesturing to the only open chair, strategically placed between her and Vera. I pulled it out, sat down, and folded my hands on the table. Callista launched right into it. "We've all sacrificed a lot for this family," she began, eyes darting between us like she was reading a script. "And now that things are changing, it's important we come together." Eason nodded along. "This isn't about control, it's about what's fair." Vera added, "You were always more sensitive, Lunith, but we trust you'll do what's right for everyone." "Right." Draven just smirked, swirling his wine glass like we were at a charity gala. Callista slid a folder across the table toward me. "It's a proposed restructuring of the Ambrose shares," she said. "A holding trust. Everyone equal, no surprises." I didn't open it. "Let me guess," I said, keeping my tone even. You want me to sign over my shares so they're under a family umbrella? She smiled, relieved I understood. Exactly, it's just cleaner this way. I leaned back. Like how you handled the wedding invites, I asked. The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Vera's lips twitched. Ison suddenly found interest in the grain of the table. Callista blinked twice. You're not asking for equality, I said. You're asking for silence, for obedience. Callista's expression hardened. That's not fair. No, I said, finally opening the folder and flipping through the first page. What's not fair is being erased and then asked to co-sign the erasure. Draven leaned in, his voice low and patronizing. You think you're better than us now? I met his gaze. No, I just finally believe I'm not less. There it was. The real silence. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, just real. I stood up, closed the folder, and left it on the table. You've made your position clear, I said. Now here's mine. I won't be manipulated through family guilt or business strategy. I'm not signing anything. Callista opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Vera murmured, You'll regret this, Luneth. I looked directly at her. If I've survived 34 years of being overlooked, I think I'll manage. Without waiting for a response, I walked to the door, opened it, and stepped outside. The air hit different, cooler, cleaner, as if the house had been holding its breath. Once I got into the car, I texted Calder. They blinked first. If they wanted a war, they should have remembered who taught me how to hold a hammer. The day after that so-called family meeting, I woke up to a dozen missed calls and a string of text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. I hadn't said a word about what happened in Vera's dining room, hadn't told anyone outside of Calder, but apparently someone else had. I rolled over, tapped my phone, and opened Facebook. The first thing that hit me was the photo. It was from the wedding, same floral arch and polished smiles, same champagne glasses raised. Only this time, the caption wasn't a celebration. It was a performance. It's hard, the post began, when someone you love turns against the family that raised them, when grief turns into greed. Callista's name was tagged. So was Ison. Even Draven had liked it. There was no mention of my name, of course, but it didn't take a genius to read between the lines. Below the caption were carefully chosen hashtags. Shiark family first, blood before paper, legacy is earned. The comments were worse. I can't believe someone would exploit their grandfather like that. She sounds ungrateful. Ugh, typical. Quiet until there's money involved. And then, as if to twist the knife deeper, there was the image of Ambrose's empty chair at the wedding, cropped perfectly to leave out the fact that no one had saved a seat for me. They didn't just want to rewrite the story, they wanted to burn mine out of it. My phone buzzed again, a text from Calder. We can respond if you want, but once you step into their digital circus, it's hard to leave it with your soul intact. I stared at his words. He was right. I knew how this worked. Callista thrived in optics. Everything she posted was a calculated move. She didn't care about truth. She cared about narrative, and she was weaponizing mine. Still in my robe, I sat at the kitchen table with the post printed out beside me. It felt heavier than paper. I burned it, tossed it into the fireplace, and watched the edges curl and blacken. When the last scrap turned to ash, I stood up and got dressed. Jeans, a soft gray sweater, nothing flashy. Neutral. I didn't want to match their performance with one of my own. I texted Peter and asked to meet. He suggested the cafe off 11th, the one we used to like before everything started unraveling. When I arrived, he was already there, seated at our usual corner table, nursing a lukewarm coffee. He stood when he saw me, but his smile was tight, unsure. Hey, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. Hey! We sat in silence for a few seconds. Then I leaned in slightly. So, I began, you've been quiet lately. He nodded. Yeah. Another pause. I saw the post, he said finally. A few people sent it to me. My boss even asked about it. Thought I should know what I'm tied to. Tied to? I repeated, eyebrows raised. I mean, look, Luneth, I didn't sign up for family court. I've got enough on my plate without getting dragged into some inheritance war. I stared at him. You think I asked for this? I'm just saying, your family is messy, publicly messy now. So you're walking away. He didn't answer, just stared at his cup like it had something wise to say. I stood up. You don't have to say it, I told him. Your silence already did. Outside, the sun had started to set. The air was crisp. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked the long way back to the car, giving myself space to absorb it all. By the time I got home, my spine ached from holding myself upright through another round of quiet betrayal, but I wasn't tired. I was clear. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at my desk, and opened Calder's email thread. All the documents were there. Ambrose's notarized amendment, his video statement, a letter I had drafted weeks ago but never sent. I revised the letter. No emotion, no venom. Just facts. I attached everything. Then I scheduled the email to go out at 9 a.m. the next day. I closed the laptop, stood, and walked into the den. Lit the last of the candles near the photo of Ambrose. Took one long look at the man who had given me everything in his quiet way. Then I walked out the back door, past the fence, and into the woods. The trees welcomed me like old friends, standing tall, unbothered by human noise. I let the wind pass through me, cool and clean, and I whispered into the dusk. You taught me how to build. Now I'm building a wall they won't get through. They thought I was soft because I didn't shout. They thought I was weak because I hadn't hit back. They forgot I was forged in the same fire that built the very company they're fighting to own. That was just chapter 1. By Monday morning, the silence had morphed into strategy. Calder confirmed what I already sensed. The family had retained counsel. Multiple, actually. Callista had gone with a boutique firm out of San Francisco. Of course. Always image first, always with an eye for optics. Vera used a local name, someone old enough to remember when Meryl used to hand out cigars in the church lobby. I didn't feel nervous. What I felt was clarity. The meeting was held at a rented conference room in a neutral location, clean, glass-walled, and sterile. It looked like the kind of place where foundations decide who gets grants and who gets nothing. I arrived precisely at 10:56 a.m., 4 minutes early, wearing a neutral beige suit. Nothing flashy, no jewelry, not even a brooch. I didn't need to speak loud. The truth would do the talking. Calder was already inside, setting up. He looked calm, measured. The same quiet steadiness I remembered from when we were teenagers sitting on opposite ends of the library table, waiting for debate practice to start. They're all here, he said, closing his laptop. Let's not keep them waiting, I replied. We walked into the main room together. The other side of the table was full. Callista sat in the center, perfectly poised, her legal team flanking her. Eason sat to her left, flipping through a folder, like he understood any of it. Draven, predictably smug, offered me a thin-lipped smile. Vera didn't even look up. Meryl gave me a nod I didn't return. The air was heavy with politeness, forced, polished, rehearsed. Callista's attorney spoke first. We appreciate you agreeing to meet. Our goal is to find a resolution that benefits all parties and preserves family harmony. I said nothing. She slid a folder across the table. This is a corrected copy of Mr. Ambrose's will, updated after his passing, digitally signed, consistent with family values and expectations. Calder didn't even reach for it. I did. I opened it, skimmed. Every word reeked of forgery. The date was posthumous. The digital signature? Sloppy. I closed the folder and reached into my leather case, pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table with 2 fingers. Inside was everything. The original amendment, handwritten, notarized, sealed in wax. A letter from Ambrose, addressed to me, in his own words. Luneth understands legacy. She doesn't need to shout to deserve it. The still image of the video we would not play. Ambrose holding up that morning's newspaper as he read aloud his decision, line by line, date stamped and witnessed. They opened the file together. At first, silence. Then it started. Callista blinked as if reading in another language. Ison leaned into Draven, whispering low. Vera's hands trembled ever so slightly as she adjusted her scarf. Calder cleared his throat, voice calm and cutting. Forgery is a felony. Shall we proceed to formal charges, or do you wish to continue this farce? Callista slammed the folder shut. You think this makes you better than us? I met her gaze. No, it makes me free from you. That's when it broke. The masks, the smirks, the little digs. You're so smug, Ison hissed. You always played the victim, and now what? You think you're the hero? No, I said. I just finally stopped playing at all. Vera's voice cut in. You've humiliated this family. I didn't have to lift a finger, I replied. You did that yourselves. Draven stood like he had something important to say, then thought better of it. I stood, folded my hands in front of me. You tried to bury the truth, so I brought a shovel. I left the folder behind. As Calder and I walked to the car, the weight lifted slowly from my shoulders. Not all at once, but enough that I could feel air again. That was satisfying, he said quietly, holding the passenger door open. That was just chapter 1, I replied, sliding in. On the drive back, we didn't speak much. The silence wasn't heavy, it was earned. Back home, I changed into jeans, pulled my hair into a bun, and stepped outside. The trees in the backyard swayed gently. I looked up through the leaves and whispered, Well, Grandpa, you weren't wrong. Turns out, it's not just wood that cracks under pressure. The folder would stay with them. But the truth? That stayed with me. The drive home from the conference center was silent, except for the wind pressing faintly against the windows. Calder didn't say much, and neither did I. We didn't need to. There are moments in life that don't require celebration. They simply ask for space to breathe. 3 days later, Calder called. They're not going to fight the documents, he said. I paused at the kitchen sink, my hand still on the dish towel. Of course they aren't. They're offering to settle, privately. I could hear the hesitation in his voice, waiting for me to jump into the ring, to swing hard. But I didn't. I'm not suing, I said. Let them keep their silence. It's heavier than anything I could hand them in court. There was a beat of quiet on the line before he responded. Pulling your shares, then? Yes, I said, already knowing the answer before he asked. That afternoon, I signed the withdrawal. Every share, 60%, was removed from Ambrose Timber. The legacy they tried to keep away from me? I didn't want to fight over it. I just wanted my name separated from theirs. What followed wasn't immediate, but it was inevitable. 2 weeks later, Callista posted a black and white photo of a foggy forest with a caption that read, We're heartbroken. After deep reflection, we've chosen to take time away from operations to rebuild in private. No mention of the meeting. No mention of the forged document. Not a single acknowledgement of me or what they tried to do. But they knew. The press picked it up fast. Heir steps down amid legacy dispute. Family timber business faces turbulence after sudden exit. The local paper tried to get a comment from me. I didn't respond. Vera was reportedly hospitalized for stress. Ison deleted his LinkedIn account. Draven scrubbed photos of the wedding from his firm's site. The word was out, even if my name wasn't in print. But it didn't need to be. Everyone knew. And what they didn't know, they felt. I spent the next few weeks in a kind of quiet restoration. My days filled with normal things. Groceries, housework, walking past the old tool shed behind the cottage. I took long phone calls with Margot when she returned from Florida, her voice like warm broth over the cold ache that still hung in my chest. Then, a month later, an invitation came in through Calder. TEDx Eugene. They were hosting a local talk called Invisible Threads, What Families Choose Not to See. He thought I should apply. I said no. Then, 2 days later, I sent in the application anyway. When I walked onto that stage, the lights didn't feel like a spotlight. They felt like warmth, like finally stepping into the sun after standing in the shadow of someone else's life for too long. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. I started my talk with a line I had rehearsed 100 times, but never spoken out loud. I was written out of a wedding I helped build. I was called an outsider by the people I once held up. And in that pause after the sentence, I felt it. Every woman in the room who'd been uninvited. Every man who'd been made to feel small. Every person who knew what it meant to be erased from their own family's story. The applause was soft at first, then louder, then lasting. Afterward, a woman in her 70s approached me with tears in her eyes. "That was my life," she said. "Thank you for saying what I never could." I nodded, unsure how to absorb praise for pain. Back home that evening, I went to the attic, opened the cedar chest again. Inside was the letter from Grandma Ione, the photo of Ambrose and I, back before silence and money distorted everything, and next to them, an envelope. It had arrived 3 weeks ago, no return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Callista. I hadn't opened it, still hadn't. I picked it up, weighed it in my hands. Thin, no more than a page or two. I sat with it for a while. Then I placed it back. Some things aren't worth unsealing. From across the room, my phone buzzed. A message from Calder. "Dinner?" I smiled. Walked to the window. The sun was dipping below the pines, casting that familiar amber hue across the hills. I turned the envelope over one more time, then tucked it beneath the stack, under Ione's letter. Let silence do what it had done so well for years. Only now, it was mine to own. By late August, the heat had softened, giving way to a quieter warmth, the kind that didn't cling to your skin but settled into the bones, like the peace that follows a long storm. The unopened envelope from Callista still rested on the table by the window. Each morning, I walked past it. Each night, I saw it catch the porch light as it spilled through the glass. I'd picked it up once or twice, held it in my hands, turned it over, but I never opened it. Some things aren't worth unsealing. That morning, I was in the garden before breakfast, gloves on, knees in the dirt, pruning the tomato vines that had grown wild and full. The soil was warm, damp from the sprinkler I'd set the night before. Earth under the nails, sweat at the temples. It all felt like home in a way the Ambrose estate never did. The old shed still stood at the back of the property, sagging slightly on one side. I'd meant to fix it, but somehow, its leaning frame made it more honest. It held Ambrose's tools, his workbench, a few spare planks that smelled like pine even now. I hadn't touched anything inside, not really. It felt like disturbing a page he never got to finish. As I watered the basil pots along the fence, a familiar crunch of tires on gravel made me look up. Calder stepped out of his car with 2 coffees and a manila folder tucked under his arm. He wasn't in a suit this time, just jeans and a button-up. Comfortable. "You're early," I said as he approached. "Figured you might be out here," he said, handing me one of the cups. We sat on the porch, the steam from the drinks curling between us. For a moment, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that only shows up between people who don't need to fill space with noise. He finally nodded toward the envelope. "Still there?" I glanced back through the screen door. "Yep. Probably will be until the day I die." "I could burn it for you," he offered, only half kidding. I smiled. "Nah. Some things deserve to sit and rot in the daylight." He handed me the folder. "Community board's looking for a new member, non-profit side. You'd be perfect." I flipped it open, scanned the names, the mission. Nothing flashy, but real. "You're not done building," he said quietly. I looked at him. "I think I've just started." Later that week, I walked through the farmer's market. The same stalls I'd passed for years now greeted me with nods and hellos. The woman who sold honey gave me an extra jar just because. A boy from the bakery handed me a free scone, said it was in Ambrose's name. Apparently, they'd put up a bench outside with his plaque. Built things, grew people. I didn't cry when I saw it. Just sat for a moment, letting the weight of the last few months settle around me like a well-worn jacket. A little girl with 2 braids and a missing front tooth walked up to me while I browsed the herb section. "Were you the lady who talked on the red stage?" she asked, eyes wide. I crouched down so we were eye level. "I was. My mom said you were really brave." I smiled. "Tell her I said thank you, and tell her I was the one who was supposed to disappear. But I didn't." When I got home that evening, I climbed the stairs to the attic. The cedar chest waited like it always had. I placed the TEDx lanyard inside, beside Ione's letter, beside Ambrose's will, and the envelope, still unopened. I sat in the armchair near the window, put on one of Ambrose's old records. Crackly, rich, familiar. The kind of music that doesn't ask for attention, but fills the air just the same. Then I opened my journal. Final entry. They called me an outsider, but the legacy I carry doesn't need their approval. I closed the book and walked outside, past the garden, to the cedar tree in the far corner of the yard. In my hands, I carried a young sapling. Pear. Hardy. Quiet in its growth. I knelt, dug the hole slowly, deliberately, letting the soil gather around my fingers. And I planted it. Not for them. For me. Because not every scar fades, but some grow flowers. Sometimes the loudest message isn't the one you shout, it's the one you deliver in silence, with truth. This story wasn't just about inheritance, it was about reclaiming identity after being erased, about choosing dignity over drama. Have you ever been treated like an outsider in your own family? What would you have done if you were in Luneth's shoes? If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more true life stories that speak to the heart. Your voice matters here.